The day in the 1100s began very early. Long before the sun showed its face, the first sounds would wake people. A rooster's crow was a common alarm clock. Dogs might bark. Soon the sounds of people stirring would join in. Families lived in small, often crowded homes. The air would be cool and the light dim. People rose from simple beds, perhaps just piles of straw on the floor. They did not have many belongings. Their first thoughts were of the day's work ahead, a day that would be long and full of physical effort. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, villages slowly came to life. Smoke would start to curl from the roofs of cottages as small fires were lit for warmth and cooking. The light revealed a world very different from ours. There were no paved roads in most villages, just muddy tracks. Animals like chickens and pigs might wander freely. Children, if not already tasked with chores, would soon be put to work alongside their parents. The morning was a busy time, preparing for the essential tasks that ensured survival for the family and the community. The vast majority of people in the 1100s worked the land. Farming was the most common job. Peasants, who made up most of the population, toiled in the fields from sunrise to sunset. They used simple tools, often made of wood. An iron-tipped plough pulled by oxen was a valuable piece of equipment. They grew crops like wheat, barley, oats and rye. These grains were essential for making bread and ale, the staples of their diet. Life was tied to the seasons, with planting in the spring and harvesting in the late summer and autumn being the busiest times. Other jobs were also vital to the medieval community. The blacksmith was a very important person. He worked with iron, making and repairing tools, horseshoes and weapons. His forge, with its hot fire and ringing hammer, was a noisy place. Millers ground the grain into flour at the local mill, which might be powered by water or wind. Weavers, often women, produced cloth from wool or linen. Carpenters built and repaired homes and furniture. These skilled artisans provided necessary goods and services, supporting the agricultural backbone of medieval society. Their skills were passed down through generations. Food in the 1100s was simple for most people. Bread was the main food. It was often dark and coarse, made from rye or barley. Peasants ate a thick soup or pottage. This was made with grains, vegetables like peas and beans, and sometimes a little meat if they were lucky. Herbs from the garden added flavor. Fruit was eaten in season. Nobles ate much better. They had more meat like venison and pork and white bread. They also enjoyed spices, which were very expensive and came from faraway lands. Food preparation was basic. Cooking was usually done over an open fire in the middle of the home. Most peasant houses had a single room. A cauldron hanging over the fire was used for boiling pottage or other stews. Bread was often baked in a communal oven in the village, if one was available. Otherwise, it might be baked in the ashes of the hearth. There were no refrigerators, so food had to be preserved by salting, smoking, or drying. This meant that fresh food was a seasonal treat for many people. Clothing in the 1100s was also practical and made from local materials. Wool was the most common fabric. Sheep were everywhere, and their wool was spun into yarn and then woven into cloth. Linen, made from the flax plant, was used for undergarments and finer clothes. The clothes were simple in design. Men typically wore a tunic, often belted at the waist with trousers or leggings. Women wore a long tunic or gown, sometimes with an overdress. Colors were usually muted, derived from natural dyes from plants, though brighter colors were possible for those who could afford them. Homes for peasants were small and simple. Most families lived in one-room houses. The walls were often made of wattle and daub. This was a framework of wooden strips or wattle, plastered with a mixture of clay, mud and straw, known as daub. Roofs were commonly thatched with straw or reeds. The floor was usually just packed earth. There was very little furniture, perhaps a rough table, some benches or stools and sleeping pallets. Windows were small openings, sometimes covered with wooden shutters or oiled cloth, as glass was a luxury few could afford. Animals might even share the living space in winter for warmth. Medieval society in the 1100s had a clear structure. This is often called the feudal system. At the very bottom were the peasants, also known as serfs or villeins. They were not free. They were tied to the land and worked for the lord of the manor. They had to give him a share of their crops and labor. In return, they received protection and a small plot of land to farm for themselves. Life for peasants was hard, with constant work and few rights. They owed allegiance and service to their local lord. Above the peasants were the knights and lesser nobles. Knights were warriors who fought on horseback. They swore loyalty to a higher lord or the king. In exchange for their military service, they were often granted land called a fief. These nobles managed their estates and the peasants who lived there. They lived in better homes than peasants, sometimes small castles or fortified manor houses. They had more comforts and a more varied diet. Their main role was to provide military strength and maintain order on behalf of their superiors. Higher up the social ladder were the powerful barons and earls. These were the great landowners and important vassals of the king. They controlled large territories and had many knights who served them. They lived in large castles, which were symbols of their power and status. These nobles often advised the king and played a significant role in governing the kingdom. Sometimes they could be very powerful, even challenging the king's authority. Their lives were filled with managing their lands, engaging in politics, and participating in warfare or tournaments. At the very top of the social structure was the king. He was believed to be chosen by God to rule. The king owned all the land in theory, granting large portions to his most loyal nobles in exchange for their support and military service. Alongside this secular hierarchy, the church was immensely powerful. Bishops and abbots were often great landowners themselves and held significant influence. The Pope in Rome was a major figure in European politics. The church touched everyone's life from birth to death, providing spiritual guidance but also wielding considerable temporal power. Leisure time was scarce for most people in the 1100s, especially for peasants. Their days were filled with hard labor from dawn until dusk. However, there were some moments for relaxation. Holy days or holidays provided breaks from work. These were often religious festivals like Christmas or Easter. On these days, people would attend church services. Afterward, there might be feasting, dancing, singing, and games in the village. These events were important for community bonding and offered a welcome respite from daily toil. Nobles had much more leisure time. Hunting was a popular pastime for noblemen. They would hunt deer, boar, and other game in forests. Falconry, using trained hawks to catch birds, was also a favorite sport. Tournaments were another exciting form of entertainment for the nobility. Knights would compete in mock battles, showing off their skills in jousting and combat. Feasts were common in noble households with large amounts of food, drink, music, and entertainment like minstrels and jesters. These activities displayed their wealth and status. As darkness fell, the day would draw to a close for everyone. Without bright artificial lights, activity largely ceased after sunset. Candles made from animal fat known as tallow or beeswax, which was more expensive, provided some light indoors, but they were used sparingly. Most people would eat a simple evening meal. This meal was often similar to what they ate earlier in the day, perhaps leftover pottage or bread and cheese. Families would gather in their small homes. They might tell stories or talk quietly before preparing for bed. The end of the day was generally quiet and early. There was little to do once it was dark. People went to bed soon after nightfall to save on fuel and candles, and to rest for the next day's labor. Homes were secured as best as possible against the dangers of the night. For most, sleep came on simple straw mattresses. The world outside would be dark and still, except for the sounds of nature or the occasional guard in a larger town or castle. Thus ended a typical day in the 1100s, a life closely tied to the rhythms of nature and the demands of survival.